Okay, so here's our bubble sort code, and we're starting with an array of 5 flavors. And I'm populating the array. This is a different order than we saw in the picture that I showed in the last video, but the technique is the same. So I do have to create a string variable, the temporary variable, and this is for that swapping, where you remember me swapping in the last video and shifting the values around with a temporary variable, and that's what that temporary variable is. And look at this guy here, the temp variable. And also we have a Boolean, which I've called made a swap. We have to, as long as we keep swapping, we can assume that the array is out of order. But there's going to come a time where I make it through an entire pass of the array without having to do any swaps at all, and then I know that the array has been sorted, and at that point made a swap is false, and I can stop. There's no point in keeping going while the array is sorted. So this is an efficient way of doing it, to create a Boolean called made a swap. Okay, and you don't have to initialize it to anything. I suppose you could just initialize it to a false for starters, but we're about to initialize it to false anyway, right inside of the loop. So here is the nested looping. I have a for loop inside of a do loop. It doesn't have to be these styles of loops. This is what your book uses. You could use nested for loops, for example, but this is a good way of doing it, the for loop inside of the do loop. So the do loop is like the outer loop that's kind of driving the number of times this whole mechanism needs to be repeated in order to be completely sorted. But the inner loop, the for loop, is kind of like the workhorse, the workhorse, or the nuts and bolts of the mechanism, where like what I was doing in the last video. Is this one greater than or equal to the one after it? If so, we're going to swap them. Is this one greater to the one after it? If so, we're going to swap them. So that like kind of nitpicky comparison and swapping, that is what the inner loop does. So we start with the outer loop by made a swap. This is an important step, and I'm going to say do not forget this line, because if you do a bubble sort on your own for an assignment, I see students forgetting this line a lot, and it's an easy mistake if a lot of students are doing it, but it really has profound consequences on your program results. So don't forget that. And so then inside this, we have this for loop, the inner loop, and I'm setting this to go to, I was starting with the loop counter I, for example, and keep going while I is less than max flavors. Max flavors is 5 in this example, but notice max flavors minus 1. That minus 1 is very important, and here's why. You remember me going through this, and this inner mechanism is always about looking at the current value and comparing him to the one after him. Looking at the current value, comparing him to the one after him. When you get to the last value, there is no one after him. You would walk right off the edge of your array and your program would crash, basically. So that's why you only go to max number, whatever that highest number is, minus 1. You only ever want to go to the second to the last element in the array when you're doing a bubble sort and when you're doing your comparisons in the bubble sort. Okay, don't go to the last one because he doesn't have anybody after him to compare to. Okay, so that's why the minus 1 is there. And then this is the comparison. If the current flavor we're looking at is less, you know what, actually that should have been started as a greater than. If it's greater than, because if we're doing A to Z, we're doing a greater, if the flavor that we're looking at is greater than, meaning a higher letter in the alphabet, than the one after him, okay, you can access the one after him by just offsetting the loop counter I by 1, okay? So if flavors I is greater than flavors I plus 1, they're out of order and we have to swap them. And so this is the temporary, the shifting around with the little temp variable. It's just 3 assignment statements. You're putting the current flavor into the temp for safekeeping. You're moving the second flavor into where the first flavor was. And then you're moving the temp safekeeping flavor into where the second flavor was. I know that, is probably hard to follow when you're listening to me say it, but that's really what's going on. Just the 3 variable assignment statements, shifting this one from there and that, So you just use your code model when you're doing that. And then very importantly, if I have swapped them, which I've just done, I need to set that flag variable to true, okay, because I've made a swap. And so I'm going to keep doing this, that whole spiel, this whole thing, while I'm still making swaps. As I said, there's going to come a time when there are no swaps being made, and then I know I'm sorted and the loop can end. That's it. That's a bubble sort, okay? And then I've just added a second loop here to print the sorted flavors. Now, this is just a standard little for loop. I'm using loop counter K and using loop counter as array index, and so I'll just go ahead and run this. You can see I'm in alphabetical order, okay, thanks to the bubble sort. And just one more quick thing. So in this example, we've sorted in regular alphabetical order, A to Z. If I asked for descending alphabetical order, Z to A, all I would have to do is change one single character in this program. Okay, can you guess what it is? It's this one. All you have to do is flip the sign for descending alphabetical order. Flip the sign to reverse the sort order. Now I'll run that and show you the results. Now it's descending alphabetical order. Okay, so I'll change this back, and that's that.